Good morning. Today is September the 17th, 2013, and we're interviewing Michael Roy as part of the Roots to Boots project of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. Michael, I'd like to ask you first to give us a little bit of family history in terms of where your grandparents and your parents came from before we get into South Africa.
Interesting. My family name is Roy, shortened from Polish Rotowski. And the family came from two little towns south of Warsaw, a town named Żyrodów, 40 kilometers south of Warsaw, and another town that I can't pronounce, starts with an M. And there were two families that married in the 1800s, was Rubenstein and another name that I don't remember anymore, and eventually the Rotowski family moved to South Africa via London. So at some point they were in London for a period of time where some more family was born, came to South Africa, to Cape Town, and in
What year was that?
I would say it was about 1905, 1903. I don't have a good record of it. What I have is a marriage certificate from 1888 of a Rubenstein and a Rotowski. So they came to Cape Town. Abraham Rotowski, my grandfather, was apparently a watchmaker. He had a watchmaking business in Cape Town. The mother, Rachel, had, I don't think worked, but the family was extremely poor, as I understand it, had no resources. So the poor grandfather was working in this watchmaking store. And when I was a kid, I was shown where the store was in Cape Town, a little street, a very little space. And so my dad was one of 7 brothers and 3 sisters, 10 children. And knowing that they were poor, eventually 2 brothers kind of broke out of the pack. My father, Barney, and his brother, Simon, and established a small clothing factory at about the time of the middle of World War I, about 1917, roughly. And their first goal, I would imagine, was to start, selling product, whatever that was, and bringing cash to the family so that they could survive. Because now they had all these kids and they had to go through school. My dad had what was the equivalent of about a 9th grade education, and then from there he was full-time in this clothing company, and they're manufacturing, and they established some brand names. Samson was the name of the working overall, and eventually it expanded into government contracts and became really a huge business in Cape Town. But that's many years later. But in 1936, the name was officially changed from Rotowski to Roy, except for one brother. There's always one in the pack who doesn't go along with the idea. And so that particular brother stayed Rotowski. And his wife just passed away last week at 99 years of age.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So then my father was established in the clothing company, which became a public company in South Africa in 1936, floated on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So suddenly the family became much more significant in business, perhaps a little more wealthy, but they started to employ large numbers of people, 1,000, and eventually when I joined the business in 1965, there were 2,000 employees.
And how did your mother come into the picture?
My mother, her family had an interesting history. Her name is Lazar. Dulcie Lazar was her name. And the Lazar family came from Budapest and Prague. And so it's stock, picking up orders for Valley Shoe and coming back to Switzerland and dropping them off and spend a few months resting and then do this trip again. And he was a technical guy too, so they decided to send him to South Africa, to Cape Town. And when he got to Cape Town, he had money from the firm and instructions to buy or purchase a building. And he built a 4-story building, as I remember. It still stands in Cape Town. It's no longer Valley. But he established this Valley operation for the shoe company, and they apparently did extremely well. And he married Amy, who was my grandmother, Friedman, at some point, and I don't know the dates anymore. And they had, my mom and 3 other children, total of 4. And then my dad married Dulcie Lazar also in 1936. What a big year that was.
How did they meet?
Company. They met in Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was born in Cape Town and my mom was born in Cape Town, so they were first generation South Africans, as we would say in America today. And I was born in 44. My dad had just come back from the war. He'd been in the South African Army, which was part of Montgomery's forces in World War II in the British Army against Rommel in Egypt and Libya. And then my sister was born in 1949. And that's where we were basically through World War II.
Tell us about your childhood in South Africa. What was it like? What are your memories? What were the things that you cherished the most about that childhood?
Well, I think it was a very tranquil and peaceful and wonderful time for South African people of white skin. We were privileged in a certain way by government decree, by all these apartheid laws that kept whites separate from everybody else, and whites had more opportunity than black people. And we went to the best schools and had the best education. And I just remember the days were, filled with, you had to play sport and you had to do athletics and you had to, obviously do your schoolwork and get your grades, but it was a really wonderful time. It was probably the best country in the world, I would imagine, to grow up in as a young guy. I'm talking until about age 18. Things started to change as we grew older because the system in South Africa started to cramp down on everybody. It got tougher for everybody.
Were you aware of what apartheid meant?
Yeah. I can give you a good experience that I had. I used to take a double-decker London-type bus from outside my house at the bus stop all the way through to the city of Cape Town, so we lived in the suburbs, to go to my school, which was SACS, South African College School. It was established in about the 1800s, middle 1800s, and it was one of Cecil Rhodes's favorite schools because that school still has a Rhodes Scholar that goes to Oxford every year. So it was one of South Africa's prime schools. But I used to take the bus into the city and then walk up past what we call the Great Synagogue through the gardens in Cape Town, which are very beautiful, formal gardens with beautiful lawns and flower beds. And the synagogue on the one side of my school was just back about half a mile from where the synagogue was. So I went to this school and I would take the bus. And then every time the bus stopped, I would go upstairs and sit in the front. So I wanted the front, left, or right seat so I could see everything. Mm-hmm. And one morning, as I got on the bus, the conductor said, "You can't go upstairs anymore." I said, "Why?" He said, "Black people only upstairs now." I was like shocked. That was my seat. And the bus at that point of the journey was half empty. So it would take, 2 or 3 more stops and the bus would be full, but I always got my seat. So now I was downstairs where all white people were sitting and standing room only at that point. So that was a big experience for me, and I suddenly realized what was going on. People were around us who were doing the servant gardening, chauffeuring, car cleaning, running the working in our factories and so on, but not we couldn't really understand what it meant to them at that point. I was too young. Later on, as I said, around 18, it kind of, the hammer dropped, and I realized what was happening.
And when you realized what was happening, what were your feelings about it?
Well, we had a big advantage, white people, and we were reluctant to get involved because there was pressure on our parents and all of their friends and all the people in business who were business owners not to rock the boat, so to speak, because if they rocked the boat and the police came along and interviewed your parents because your kid was involved in an organization called, say, NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students, like Nikki was involved in, and you have issues with the police, maybe it would affect the business, and the message was, don't do things that would mess up your parents' relationships or business affairs. So I was one who was silent for a long time, but I had, eventually when I finished university in 65, I was very concerned because I went into this big family business with more than 2,000 employees, and 1,900 of them were what we call colored or black people. They were our employees, and my dad's responsibility. I mean, he had to pay them every week, and we had a gigantic payroll. And yet they had no participation in the political system whatsoever, in a very minor way in their own areas, with electing local people, but not on the provincial or national scale.
So why did you and your wife decide to leave South Africa?
Well, we got married in '69 and Nikki had a first kid in '71. That was Gavin. We had Justin in '72, and Monique in '76. By which time I think our feelings had kind of solidified around the fact that the future of South Africa was starting to look bleak. From the point of view that our lifestyle was going to change. That was the first thing that made me nervous. Well, if I can't have a peaceful life and a life where my kids are protected and their futures are reasonably secure, then I have to look around. And that was the first impetus to take a look and see what's going on in the world on a much more practical level than theory. Well, let's just take a look. Yeah, it looks good in England, it looks good in Canada, let's do a few trips. So we did a few trips. We knew people through business in the United States, in New York. We knew people in Britain. We knew South Africans who'd left and done well in England. We knew South Africans who'd left to Canada and to the United States way early on in the 60s, professional people much older than us, doctors, who just after the Sharpeville incident in South Africa where the cops had shot 70-odd people, a lot of professional people like doctors said enough. They'd been struggling already with this apartheid problem since 1948. We were much younger, so we didn't struggle with it until we were adults. So the formation of the idea was really to protect our futures in terms of I needed a business career in a safe place. I wanted my kids to have a good education and be participants in a good economy, a safe economy. And I wanted a country that was secure. And eventually, all our thoughts came to America. Every time we thought about Australia, England, Canada, the English-speaking countries principally, because it would make it easier to communicate in English rather than try and learn Hebrew or learn French or whatever it was. So America was the center. And peculiarly at that time, the publicity coming out of America, or the news coming out of America, because I read Time magazine every week since I was a little guy, and whatever else I could get from America, like National Geographic and Reader's Digest, they all came to our house. I read everything. So America was the place. When I walked through our factory, everything there was machinery from the US, denim from the United States, cotton drill fabric from the United States. So I had this background of, this is a powerhouse. What am I missing here? I need to go find out much more. And it became obvious, reading all these various newspapers and books that what was being spoken about was Sunbelt. The Sunbelt cities from Miami through Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, Phoenix to the southern part of California was the growth area of America in the late 70s. And I would go to the United States Information Service office in Cape Town, which was run by the American consulate. I made friends with the librarian in charge, and I said, feed me everything you can on Sunbelt, just put it aside for me and I'll come in once a week, pick up what I can borrow and read what I had to read there and leave it there. So all of a sudden, in the late 70s, a friend of ours was doing a trip to the US, ended up in Dallas, had met some people, had been introduced to Aiken Gump, the law firm who had, Rick Gump was doing immigration, and despite our efforts in Cape Town to get immigration visas going, we used Rick Gump, and the next thing we had visas. Now what do we do? So, it was centered on Dallas because of a constellation of events, really, rather than picking the place because it's such a great city, which as it's turned out to be, it's really been a wonderful place.
What was the status of the business that you were in with your father at that time, when you were?
What was the stature of it?
Was the status of it?
It was running. It was a very big business.
So did that business continue when you left?
Yes, it did. I had left the business. Mm-hmm. It was clothing, and I went into my father-in-law's business, which was diamonds.
I see.
It was a manufacturer of, he would polish rough diamonds into diamond gemstones and then export those stones to clients in Antwerp and New York. So that was an international business. So in order to make the transition from South Africa to another country, I really needed another skill. I didn't want to get back into the fabric business. I didn't think I had growth potential, or I would be able to capitalize a large fabric or apparel manufacturing business in the US, or anywhere else for that matter, with the resources that we had, because we couldn't take money out of South Africa in the first place. Mm-hmm. And secondly, at that point I would have needed millions of dollars. And in the diamond business, I could have started my business on small parcels coming into me. I would owe back for it, I would sell it, I'd pay for it, sell it, pay for it, and build. And that's what I did. So I worked for my father-in-law in Cape Town for 5 years, just short of 5 years. I did my American gemological diamond certificate here through the school in Cape Town that they had, and qualified, and I just put the visa pack together and gave it to the consul, sent it here to Aiken Gump, and we had immigration papers pretty soon. So the clothing company was still running. I was in the diamond business from 1976, January 76, and we actually came here in January 1980. So events moved pretty fast.
Okay. And when you came here, did you say you knew maybe someone here in Dallas, or you didn't?
I knew Tony and Leonie Abramson. I knew Aubrey and Lorraine Abramson, both from Cape Town, although Tony was living in Johannesburg, had just immigrated to Dallas. And we had an introduction to Martha Morgeloff in the real estate business. You probably know who she is, and to Ronnie Steinhardt, who is a banker. Mm-hmm. So a personal introduction to both those people through one part on Nikki's family side and another through a friend of mine. So that really was the core of it. Maybe we knew we knew Eddie Melnerd too, of course. Yeah.
How did you find the process of immigration? I mean, was it easy for you to get integrated into the community?
You're talking about the documentation part
No,
of
no,
the
no,
government?
no, the personal.
Arriving here at the airport and getting integrated into society.
Getting integrated into society. What was that like for you?
I thought people were wonderful. I could not believe the friendships and the... AT&T had a slogan that was reach out and touch someone. Mm-hmm. And somebody mentioned that like in the first week I was here. I thought, that's incredible. I never heard that in South Africa in my entire life. It was like the foreign in South Africa because it was so anchored in the British style of, hanging back rather than going forward, which is, America's all about going forward and sort of reach out and touch someone, and everybody we met said, hey, you know, get back in touch with us, we need to talk to you. You know, what is your business? Oh, I'm very interested to talk to you. Or things like that happened. And then socially, of course, we wanted to meet people. And the core group of South Africans, of course, all fed on themselves initially because there were 10, then there were 20, then there were 30, but we wanted to meet American families, Dallas families. And so people were very kind. They would invite us over, and maybe it was a special thing like Passover, or it was breaking of the fast, or Thanksgiving. Those were important holidays, and so that's how we met people.
How was it for your children in terms of getting adjusted to the American school?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, my eldest was 9, Gavin,
Mm-hmm.
and he, I thought he was very South African until he hit Dallas, and the next day he's speaking American. So what happened here? That's really funny. Well, he's, you know, to give you a perspective, today he's like a baseball maven. He can quote stuff that happened years before he even was born, never mind from the time he came to America. So I think for the 3 kids it was probably a challenge, meeting kids. I remember Justin coming home and telling Nikki, I don't understand my teacher, I think she speaks Spanish. And her name was Mrs. Hairston at Prestonwood. And so we had a meeting with Mrs. Hairston. Well, she was Texan. She spoke English. You know, one of the other funny things was, just as an aside, was we bought this house that we still have on the Warm Mist, and the builder was Shaddock and Cook. And so when they handed the house to us, and we finally got the mortgage approved, and we moved in, got the keys and all that stuff, there was the supervisor of Shaddock and Cook. His name was Bob. And so he goes down the list, you know, this is the plumber, Bob, and this is the window guy, Bill, and this is the concrete guy, Bob, and this is the door guy, Bill. Everybody was Bob or Bill.
Or Billy Bob.
Bob or Billy Bob. And it was really funny. I was thinking, this is really strange. Everybody's got the same name. So the kids, I think, integrated really fast. And then, you know, because what was really going on with Gavin, he just turned 9 and 4 years to bar mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to kind of get him up to speed. So we joined Tiferet Israel. I shouldn't really say it on tape, but, you know, it wasn't the right fit for us. It was too orthodox. We had a reform background, so conservative was much more in alignment with what our feelings were, our kind of spiritual background. So Sheriff was easier. So we switched eventually to Sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, Gavin had his bar mitzvah, so did Justin, Monique had her bat mitzvah. And they had all met kids because at some point Justin and Monique went to Levine Academy at Solomon Schechter in those days with Ed Feinstein as principal, and they met many other Jewish kids and some non-Jewish kids, and everything seemed to be working fine. Honestly, in those years, people were so connected and the community was so involved. It seemed to me, not in your personal affairs, but involved to see that things were moving well for everybody. It's different today, of course.
How do you see it different today?
I think 9/11 changed America.
Did it change
People
Dallas?
came, stepped back and said, maybe not everybody's a friend anymore. It's a strange feeling.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
You think that, you see that here in Dallas, in the Jewish community?
The Jewish community in Dallas, you know, I'm quite involved through the synagogue at Anshai Torah, but I don't see it in the shul, but I see it a lot in business. In business, when I started out, it was, yeah, come on down and see us, whether it was in Waco, Austin, Houston, didn't matter, San Diego, that's places that I traveled to get my business going and establish clients. Today, it's completely different. So a couple of things happened at the time of 9/11. One was the shock of that attack.
Mm-hmm.
And the after effects. The other, I think, was the growth of the internet, because people stopped traveling so much and the internet was growing like crazy, and next thing you had all these websites. Now we had a disconnect from people. You could only reach somebody through an email, or now it's with texting. And I hate that. I'd rather sit across from somebody and explain, this is what I do, this is my product, use it in your store if you can, these are my terms, this is how I work. And it's not like that anymore at all. It's very cutthroat. I think in business people have almost to a certain extent put up barriers to like welcoming you in. It's almost you have to qualify to come in.
Well, do you attribute that to 9/11 or just the growth of technology?
I think 9/11 has the security aspect.
I see.
It's that mental that's been thrown over us. Like everything, you better be secure, you better make sure. I mean, it's visible right outside your building here. You know, it's the big poles and the concrete blocks. It's everywhere. It's much worse in a city like London. You know, when we travel to London, you look, but you don't realize what you're looking at until you actually look at it. It's a beautiful flower pot. Yeah, but it weighs 5 tons. It's got 5 tons of concrete and one little plant in the top. It's there for a reason.
Let me ask you this, aside from the laws regarding apartheid, were there any laws or specific cultural differences that you experienced that were different between South Africa and the United States? Either with regard to gender or anything else that would have been apparent to you?
I mean, the Americans that came to Cape Town prior to the period of me traveling to America to visit were incredibly nice people. And I didn't notice anything related, for example, to race relations. For example, my father made his personal chauffeur, black chauffeur, available to our friends who came from New York, and told the chauffeur, you know, drive them all over wherever they want to go. And they sat in the same car for 2 or 3 days on end, going from place to place to place to place. And his driver's name was Lawrence. And he would take my dad's friend's student Betty around. They were American white people, and the driver was a black guy. They'd stop for lunch, nobody interfered with them. It was obvious this was the driver of the car, and this was the guests from another country, and there was never any trouble in South Africa. And my observations at that time were that Americans were fully involved in the world and had a worldview and had stature and this really massive industrial output that has changed a little bit now, but nothing could faze Americans or America, and I kind of admired that. I thought it was an amazing feat, considering the isolationism of the 30s into the massive growth of America in the 60s and 70s, 80s.
When I interviewed your wife, she told us the story about the amazing feat of bringing the Sefer Torah from South Africa that your family uses. Is there any particular item, physical item, that you personally brought or would have liked to have brought yourself from South Africa?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a funny thing. I would like to have taken the entire city of Cape Town and brought it to America. Everybody. It would have been an incredible experience. Of course, ridiculous, you can't do it. I think if some family had followed me, or maybe gone ahead of me, and said, yeah, this is good, we should do this for the family. But nobody's followed me. And not my sister either. She says she wants to turn the lights off. So I miss that. Yes, that's a piece that I wish had happened. Physical objects, no. You leave behind what you leave behind. I left a beautiful city with beautiful mountains, sea, forests right on my doorstep. And I miss that in a way because Dallas is generally a flat place with not many topographical features that you would say, this is great. Cape Town had many of those. On any morning in between 10 and 12, and you could go park up Table Mountain in the morning, and in the afternoon and go to the beach, and in the evening go to the waterfront, have dinner with somebody, or go fishing, or go walking in the hills. Beautiful.
Were there any pieces of family memorabilia that you did bring that were significant?
Well, we brought photographs,
Mhm.
and now we see probably not enough, even though my dad was an avid photographer. Some of the records and photographs got lost and not to be retrieved because I guess some got destroyed over time, just lost. My sister has some, and I've left that with her, or that collection with her. I mean, I have great memories, and I will find time one day perhaps to write a story for my kids and my grandkids particularly, so they know where we came from, why we, and this will help, but you know, why we did what we did, and why we ended up in Dallas, and what I did in business, and why I did certain other things.
How often have you been able to go back?
The first 2 trips were unfortunate. My father died, my mother died.
Mm.
And then we went back in '85. That was trip 3 for Nikki's parents' golden wedding anniversary. And then we went back in 1999 for a real holiday trip to Cape Town with my entire family. Gavin had his wife, Jenny, and there were no grandkids at that point. We did the game reserves and Cape Town. That was really good. And then we went back in 2005 to see my sister, and there was a wedding between a family of mine and friends of ours, their kids. And we also did another trip to a game park, but I haven't been back since 2005. I have no urgent need at this point to go back.
You did not?
No, it's basically done.
So when you first arrived here, you told us about the congregation that you joined and then the change. Are you still members of Shearith Israel?
No. That history, we stayed at Shearith Israel until about 1997, and then Shearith Israel was this big, huge, rather impersonal type synagogue where I don't think Nikki or I really had an outlet for what we were looking for, or had the true feeling that we could just relax in shul. It was so busy and so vast, and so many people walking in and out, up and down all the time. And peculiarly at that time, early in 1998, Rabbi Stefan Weinberg had said to me, "What about starting a shul?" I had lunch with him, and one day in probably February or March, no, it must have been January or February of 1998, he was still employed by Shearith.
Mm-hmm.
His contract was not going to be renewed. And I said, "Well, if you start a shul, count us in." And that's as far as the conversation went, never thinking it would amount to anything, because not many shuls get started. And so a month later, Nikki answered the phone at home, and it was Stefan or somebody representing Stefan, and said, "Look, we want to have a first meeting of this new synagogue that Stefan is going to start, and we want you to be, founding members, and will you give your house for it?" And so on March 3rd of 1998, we had the first meeting of what was called Anshai Torah at that time. And I was on the steering committee of 5 or 6 of us, 5 or 6 families that were the founders of Anshai Torah. And Stefan addressed the 20 or so people that were there, and we made a list of people. I became the treasurer, and there were some officers, and we made a not-for-profit corporation, and then eventually Anshai Torah merged on July the 1st into what became Anshai Torah. For Anshai Emet became Anshai Torah with Anshai Torah. I'm going very fast through the history because it was 3 very, very intense months: March, April, May, 4 months, and June, and then July was the merger into Anshai Torah. And so I stayed on the board until last year.
So you've been very involved since the
very involved.
beginning of the synagogue.
Yeah, it was one of the major things that Nikki and I did, and Nikki, gave her Torah to the shul. It was the first gift the combined venture had, that Anshai Torah had received from anybody, other than a few checks to keep us going. That was the major gift.
That's
Because the very first question that evening of March 3rd was, well, we've got a rabbi, we probably can rent space, but we don't have a Torah. And Nikki said, we have a Torah. People were saying, wow, we have a Torah, we have everything, we can do this.
Have you been involved in any other community agencies or?
In Cape Town, I was involved in, what do they call it in Cape Town? The Board of Deputies was the Cape Town version of the Jewish Federation. And some of my uncles were involved. So once in a while they'd say, call these people and see what you can do. But I didn't do much in Cape Town. When I got to Dallas, I was introduced to Mo Stein, who was the head of the Jewish Federation, executive director, right, at that time. And Lil and Martha Morgulov, late Lil Stein, and Martha worked together in the real estate business, and they sold us our house. So I got to know Mo real quick. So in the first 2 years, I did a little bit of, here are the cards, go call these people, but I didn't do anything else. And I generally got disgruntled with the Jewish synagogue scene in Dallas. It was very controlled and very contrived, I thought. Very ritual driven, as it still is, by the way, and I've subsequently learned that Judaism is practiced by ritual. You do certain things repetitively every day or every Yontif, every Passover, and you don't do anything different. If you want something different, you have to go to California and do one of those different shuls. But our shul is a traditional shul, what we established, Anshai Torah, and that suits our needs. And, we were proud to be part of it and to be able to build and make it grow into a big entity.
How important was Israel to you as a child when you were growing up? Did you consider yourself a Zionist?
Not from the point of view that I pack my bags and get on a plane and go and live there. I never felt that way. I felt more South African until the day I left to come to America than probably any other feeling I ever had. I probably would have hated the idea of going to live in Israel because I would have had to have learned Hebrew and started a new business, started a new trade, and do things that I really didn't want to do. I'm very focused on whatever my goal or objective is and go and achieve that, and that was on the side. I would say this, that if there'd been a really serious situation in Israel, like a collapse in 67 or in 73, I might have just said, this is it, I need to go and help. But it seemed to me that the Israelis had, partially in 73, but with a lot of help, but mostly had it under control. So the Zionist part of it, I feel very strongly that we should have a state of Israel and it has to exist. And whatever help we can give, we do the best we can.
Michael, is there anything that you'd like to add at all about your family, your experiences in South Africa, or your experiences here in Dallas that I might not have asked you about?
Well, the South African family was vast, had many different interests, and people did many different things. They were pharmacists and industrialists and a couple of doctors. So they were spread through the community in a big way. And today I have probably 28 first cousins, most of whom are still in South Africa, who have said, this is fine, we'll tolerate whatever happens. Only a couple of cousins have left. And they live elsewhere. One lives in India, one lives in London. My sister's still in Cape Town. And I think generally, I am the kind of person who says to people or about people, that's what they want, leave them to it, don't interfere. Although I've said to my sister many times, please come and live here, I'll make it happen. I have to go through the immigration to make it happen and all that, but I would see that it happen. But she wants to stay in Cape Town. But in America, I'm, really been amazed by the strength of community. And it's grown stronger over the years, the local community. And it may be also that after the early years, the first 10 years, let's say, from 80 to 90, during which period we had 2 bar mitzvahs and 1 bat mitzvah, that we connected more and more with the community. And knew more people, and people related to us, and people started coming to me in business who I never thought would, and I was able to help them in certain ways. And then, you know, the big growth spurt of the South African immigration into Dallas, into Texas really, because it was really nationwide, but a lot certainly came to Dallas. Just expanded the experience. You saw people, all different kinds. And there, by the way, there were many non-Jewish people who came from South Africa, who came to Caltex, for example, which has a big operation in South Africa. So there's that community too. And along the way, you meet all these people. And some stay good friends, stay friendly, and some move along, and that's how it is.
Michael, thank you so much for spending the morning with us. You've been delightful. We really appreciate your...
Thank you for the time. It's been a pleasure to do this.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much.
much.